Welcome to Slow Wine Guide 2021. I'm here with Brooke Bannister from Bannister Wines, and we're talking about the three wines that Brooke is listing in the 2021 guide. Welcome, Brooke.
Thank you.
Well, we're going to kick it off today with a very unusual grape variety, and I'm going to let you tell us all about it.
Cool. Thanks, Deborah. The first variety we're going to talk about is called Schierba, and it's really common in Germany, but not in the United States. There's barely any of it grown here. It just happens that a friend of mine who farms really close to where I live got some cuttings years ago from another winemaker who'd been going back and forth to Germany because he wanted some Riesling. And in the course of doing that, he ended up getting some Schierba cuttings as well and gave some to my friend Justin. And I'd started making Rieslings a few years ago. Justin knew that, and he called me out of the blue and said, "Hey man, I have Schierba growing out here and I got nothing to do with it, and I think you could do something cool with it, and I want you to take it." So this is the first vintage of Schierba. I'd never even heard of it, to be honest. That's how rare it is, but it's really interesting. It's actually a cross of Riesling. So what I say is it's kind of the secret love child of Riesling. You know, it's Riesling's its parent, but nobody has heard of it. And it's really interesting. It's kind of thought of as a wine that is made in a low alcohol manner in Germany. People say it tastes like black currants. We ended up with a totally different kind of iteration of it grown in the United States, which was really cool. So it's kind of thinking about where it comes from, Alexander Valley, we tend to get pretty fruity wines there. So what I also did was put some skin contact into the winemaking process. And typically with white wines, winemakers traditionally haven't wanted skin contact because they can create maybe more texture, more phenolic presence than people want in white wines. Yeah. But having made Rieslings already in an actual orange wine style with a lot of skin contact and been happy with the results, I had a sense that I could do something similar with Schierba, but not quite as extreme. So we brought the fruit in and we actually just walked on it in the picking bins, treaded it, so kind of crushed the top layers of fruit, and then put some dry ice on it and just let it sit for 24 hours. So what you have there is some broken berries and juice kind of trickling down, getting more skin contact. And then we pressed it 24 hours later. And you can see in the color and definitely then on the palate that there's some extra texture in the wine. And that worked really well to kind of balance out the bigger fruit profile that we're getting from growing this in California than you would get in like the traditional setting of Germany. And it ended up being a really nice kind of juxtaposition between the two things, actually. I've been really happy with it. And it was, I guess, you know, to a certain degree, it was an experiment and just taking kind of the best guess on what was going to work for this.
Right, for the California version of this. Well, my descriptors of this wine are as long as my arm, but I had just ripe apricot, honeycomb, raw almond, grapefruit pith, lime zest, tobacco. I was enamored. It just kept going. I could have gone for days here. So the expression is nothing like I've ever tasted, and just such a complex and beautiful wine.
Yeah, thanks. I think there's so much good wine has been made in the United States in the last 20 years that we almost have some fatigue, like with these typical varietals. So it's really fun to bring something along that nobody's tasted before. And then it did end up having this kind of pretty wide range of complexities that I didn't even know were going to come out of it. So it's been a really like fun, kind of satisfying little wine project. And I'm actually, in a few weeks, we're going to pick the next vintage. So
I know, that's exciting. Vintage number 2 coming down the pike, readers. Yeah. It's going to be worth checking out. Okay, great.
The other thing, sorry, the last thing about this wine, there's only like a little over a ton that comes out of these couple of rows. So
very low yield.
You only get 70 to 80 cases a year out of it. Yeah.
Well, it's one of those one of those true esoteric finds that you can only discover in the Slow Wine Guide. Okay, so, and here's another one. This is a Riesling from the Cole AVA. Now, this is the 2018, and I'd love you to tell us something about this, because this is an unusual, this is an orange wine version.
This is kind of an orange wine, which are, I'd say that to be fair, like the original orange wines, the credit should be given to those growing areas of Eastern Europe that developed the idea behind it. And kind of from my understanding, the idea is that if you're not growing a lot of red wines, but you want something richer that can stand up to bigger foods, and you want wines to be able to age, you just have, say, white varietals, making them on the skins give them texture, complexity, ageability, and so you kind of like have almost made a red wine out of a white grape. And they tend to have a whole different range of foods that you compare them with than a white one would. So I always thought that was really cool. I don't have any firsthand experience with orange wines, but just kind of took my best guess on how you would do that in a California setting. And so we did something very simple. We found a varietal that was high aromatics and high acid, Riesling in this case, and just put it through process in the winery like you would a red wine. So destemmed it into fermentation containers on the skins, fermented it on the skins, and then left it on the skins post-fermentation, continually tasting until we felt like the phenolic extraction was starting to get to a point where it was too extreme, and then we pressed off the skins. So there were just 2 fermentation containers of this vintage. One we left on for about 7 days post-fermentation, and one for about 14 days post-fermentation. So
okay, and these were stainless? They were not using amphora, right?
No amphora. Yeah, that's the other cool thing they do in Eastern Europe, is they're actually burying the grapes inside the amphora in the ground, walking away from it, coming back later. And yeah. I don't have the luxury of doing that. But our kind of poor man's version of making orange wine worked just fine, actually. So these were just small open top fermenters.
Open top fermenters. Yep. All right.
Yeah. So we're talking 3 to 4 weeks of skin contact, and then put it in barrels over the winter, and just kept tasting through the early spring. And when it kind of felt like the phenolics were starting to mellow out, and that was something else I had heard, was that the phenolics will be harsh, but they'll come back, they'll mellow out, and they'll start to find each other, form those chains in the wine where they get smooth and silkier. And kind of felt like that it turned a corner in spring, and so we bottled. And again, just like the Schierba, it's something with no roadmap. Nobody else I shouldn't say nobody else. There are a few people making orange wines in the United States, but nobody that I know personally or had spoken to. So just kind of had to make your best guess and use your instincts for winemaking, and make the best decision you can. That's what winemaking is about a lot of the time. And
right. with the goal of having something that's really drinkable and delicious and enjoyable, and it absolutely is. Absolutely. Yeah, so this is not an oxidative process. That's the whole point here. This is an anaerobic. This is open top fermenting.
That's true.
In terms of your aging, you're in barrel, neutral barrel.
That's
right?
true. The only thing I'll say about that is that when you expose those skins to oxygen right before fermentation starts, a lot of the compounds in there that can be oxidized get oxidized. So that's one of the reasons why orange wines end up lasting a long time, is that you've already gone and oxidized a lot of this stuff that would potentially get oxidized down the road. You've done
it's the Brown Juice Club.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So what you're looking at, and the color on this wine is a combination of just extract. There's a little tiny bit of pigment in the skin. So you've got some of that, and you've also got a little of the browning from that initial oxidation. Most browning falls out of solution and doesn't end up staining the wine. But there's a little tiny bit of that in here, along with the pigment that actually you end up with this really nice color that kind of tells
Right.
you that it's that there's skin contact on the wine.
It's gorgeous. I called it rosé, but
Yeah,
it's technically
and
not.
I have a couple. There's a couple wine shops that sell it in the rosé section. So, but one
Oh,
other thing I'll add about the texture is that there's something about these particular class of phenolics that allow it to be paired with foods you would never think of as being, you know, good combinations for wine. Like almost any of the kind of spicier Asian foods, Indian, Thai, Korean, all just are amazing with this wine because those skin phenolics allow your palate to stay fresh and keep tasting the wine as you're eating these foods. Usually spice just shuts your palate down to wine, but for some reason this works great. And so that's been one of the kind of most fun discoveries about this, is that you can pair it with really interesting spicier foods.
I love that. Beyond what we typically might, the go-to wines we might typically reach for when we're, you know, enjoying those cuisines. That's fantastic. Thank you. What a great
Yeah,
tip. Well, we'll have to give that a try for sure.
cool.
Okay. So wine number 3 is a very special old vine Swan clone Pinot Noir, and Brooke is going to tell us all about
Yeah, so Russian River Valley, East Side Road, kind of the southern end of East Side Road. This is all Sonoma County geography, but kind of classic Pinot Noir growing area. And it's Hopkins River Ranch is the name of the vineyard. Bob Hopkins been farming there with his family for 40 years, give or take, and farming with organic practices. He grows Pinot, Chard, Sauvignon Blanc. So I've been making some Saunier style rosé from some Pinot there, and then it turned out there's just a couple rows of these old, gnarly Swan clone Pinot vines, and they're actually so old that, you know, they don't even look great. You know, they don't. You go out there and you think, uh-oh.
They're not pretty. Is what
Yeah,
you're
they are
telling me. They're
not.
not pretty.
You know, one of the things, like, they're beautiful, but they're not pretty.
Yeah, it's
And
Jolie laid.
and so they have a hard time ripening because their metabolism is just so slow from their age. And but actually, that's kind of lent itself to an interesting winemaking process, which is that you have to be really careful the extraction. They're never going to get like as ripe as other varietals of, excuse me, not varietals, but other clones of Pinot out there. They're not going to get as
Right.
ripe. They just can't do it.
Are
And
they virus? Are they virus? Is that what keeps them
there's some
from?
virus in them. Yeah, there's some
Yeah.
Eutypa and some other stuff. And so we're trying to like nurse them along for as many more years as we can. But so what I end up having to be careful of in the winemaking process is not to over extract, because you can get some of those more kind of sour, shrill,
Yeah, less ripe.
phenolic notes if you just really overpress stuff, or you know, you get extraction through heat and fermentation, through how much you do in punch downs, and you get extraction from then pressing post fermentation. So I have to be really careful and do as little as possible of this fruit kind of the whole way through. And what we end up with is actually a super elegant kind of like lower extraction style of California Pinot. Like it's really it's elegant, but it's on the lighter side, but it's got that swan kind of earthiness to it, and really unique, and just fun to rescue some fruit from some old, like, organically grown vines that are that old.
Fantastic. So would you, what was I going to say? Would you say that the wine is, the alcohol's pretty low, right?
Yeah, it's in the mid 13s.
That's really
Again,
special.
because it's just your sugars can't get high enough to
Right.
get
They
to
just
that
can't
level.
get up
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
And you've been nursing these vines along for how many vintages now, Brooke?
This will be my third vintage.
Third, all right.
Yep.
Yeah, there's nothing sadder than not having been out to a region for a couple of months or 6 months maybe, and then driving by an old vine vineyard and suddenly it's not there anymore.
Yeah. And as long as people have good reasons for taking out old vines, you know, you're okay with it. So when these vines come out, it'll be for a good reason, luckily. It'll
Yeah,
just be
yeah,
that they
absolutely.
reach the end of their life like any other
Yeah,
plant does eventually.
yeah. When the virus finally has its say. Well, Brooke, I can't thank you enough for introducing us to these three delicious, unique, extraordinary wines that you've been making, and we're very, very excited to welcome you into the
Thanks.
2021 Slow Wine Guide.
Thanks a lot. It's my pleasure to introduce you, and I appreciate you including me.
Great. Thanks, Brooke.
Okay, cheers.
Bye.
Bye.